The moment I realized I was the last free human in the galaxy. I was standing naked in an alien auction house, and 3 billion credits had just been bid for my body. My name is Maya Chun. I'm 20 years old, and according to the holographic displays flickering around the crystalline chamber, I'm apparently the most aesthetically perfect specimen of humanity the consortium has ever catalogued. The irony wasn't lost on me. My sculpted physique and striking features, once sources of confidence on Earth, had become my prison among the stars. The Viridian auctioneer's 6 eyes gleamed as he gestured toward me with a tentacle dripping ceremonial oils. Behold, Lot 2847, the final unprocessed human female, age optimal for both aesthetic appreciation and potential breeding applications. Note the symmetrical facial structure, the pronounced mammary development, the narrowed waist-to-hip ratio that our xenobiologists confirm triggers deep psychological responses across 17 different species. I kept my chin high, refusing to show the terror clawing at my chest. The neural collar around my neck hummed softly, a reminder that any aggressive thought would trigger paralysis. But what they didn't know was that I'd learned to think around it. 3 months ago, I'd been a pre-med student at Columbia, worried about organic chemistry finals, and whether Jake from my study group would ever notice me. Now I was the last of my kind standing free, if you could call this freedom. The fall of Earth had been swift. The consortium didn't invade in the traditional sense. They simply appeared in our skies one morning and politely informed us that humanity's time as a free species had expired. We'd been classified as Class C sentients, intelligent enough to be useful, too primitive to be dangerous, and far too beautiful to be ignored. Most humans had been processed immediately, neural implants that turned them into willing servants, their personalities scrubbed clean to make them perfect pets for the galaxy's elite. The pretty ones became companions. The strong ones became laborers. The smart ones became living computers. I'd escaped processing by hiding in the Antarctic Research Station, where my father worked before the consortium glassed every major city. For 3 months, I'd lived in the ice, surviving on frozen rations, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might still be fighting. That hope died when they found me. 4 billion credits. A voice from the crowd sent ripples of excitement through the chamber. I could see my buyer now, a selenoid merchant whose species looked like crystallized spiders. Its mandibles clicked with anticipation. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the chamber. The bidding stands at 4 billion credits. Are there any other offers for this magnificent specimen? I closed my eyes and thought of my father's last words before the processing tubes took him. Maya, promise me something. Promise me you'll remember what it means to be human. Not just the shape of our bodies or the sound of our voices, but what's in here. He pressed his hand to his chest, over his heart. They can take our freedom, but they can't take our soul unless we let them. 5 billion credits. Another voice, this one from a corporate representative of the hegemony. They wanted me for their private collection on Proxima Station, a living museum of extinct species. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the auctioneer. When I spoke, my voice carried across the chamber with crystal clarity. I invoke the right of challenge. The room fell silent. Even the auctioneer's tentacles stopped moving. I'm sorry, he said, his translator struggling with what was clearly an unprecedented situation. Could you repeat that? I invoke the right of challenge, I said again, louder this time. According to Consortium Law 2.74, any sentient being may claim their freedom through single combat if they can prove their species' worth in battle. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then, slowly, a sound began to build laughter. It started with a few chuckles from the crowd and grew into a roar of amusement that shook the crystalline walls. My dear specimen, the auctioneer said, his voice dripping with condescension, the right of challenge is a theoretical law, never invoked because no Class C species has ever been foolish enough to attempt it. The combat is to the death, and you would face a consortium champion being specifically bred for warfare. I understand the terms, I said. I accept them. The laughter died again. In the crowd, I could see confusion replacing amusement. The consortium had conquered 3,000 worlds in the past millennium. Species far more advanced than humanity had begged for mercy, accepted slavery, chosen survival over dignity, but they'd never encountered a human who'd grown up watching Rocky movies and reading about Joan of Arc. "Very well," the auctioneer said finally. "If you insist on this theatrical gesture, the consortium will accommodate you. Champion Cather, please step forward." What emerged from the crowd wasn't just a warrior, it was a living weapon. Cather stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that looked like polished obsidian. Its 4 arms each ended in razor-sharp claws, and its eyes glowed with predatory intelligence. Bioengineered for killing, it had never lost a battle. "The combat will begin in 1 hour, the auctioneer announced. "May the stars have mercy on your soul, little human." They led me to a preparation chamber, where a medical droid scanned me with dispassionate efficiency. Subject shows elevated stress markers, but no signs of mental deterioration, it reported. Physiological assessment. Death probability 99.7%. "Thanks for the pep talk," I muttered. The droid's optical sensors focused on me. Sarcasm detected. "This is a curious response to impending termination. Most species experience terror or despair. At this juncture, most species aren't human. Indeed, your species displays an unusual psychological profile, high levels of aggression, coupled with what your language is termed stubbornness. It has been theorized that this combination is what prevented you from accepting processing voluntarily." I smiled grimly. "That's one way to put it." The droid continued its scans. "There is something else our xenobiologists have noted about humans. Your species possesses an unusual capacity for what you call spite, the willingness to choose mutual destruction over submission. It is considered an evolutionary defect, or a feature," I said. When they led me back to the arena, the crowd had tripled in size. Word had spread through the station. A human was actually going to fight for her freedom. Beings from across the galaxy had come to watch the spectacle. Cather stood in the center of the arena, its 4 arms flexing with casual menace. It had faced down species with natural weapons, energy projectors, even limited psychic abilities. A small, soft human with no visible advantages was likely to provide only moments of entertainment. "The combat begins when the tone sounds," the auctioneer announced. "Death or submission are the only acceptable outcomes." I walked to the center of the arena, my bare feet silent on the smooth floor. Cather's glowing eyes fixed on me with predatory focus. "You die quickly," it said in its guttural voice. "This is mercy." "Maybe," I said, circling slowly. "But here's something you should know about humans. We're really, really good at not dying." The tone sounded. Cather lunged forward with inhuman speed, all 4 arms reaching for me. I'd expected this. It was the logical strategy against a smaller opponent. What it didn't expect was for me to roll forward, under its guard, and drive my elbow into what I hoped was its solar plexus. The impact sent shockwaves up my arm, but Cather staggered. In that moment of surprise, I learned something crucial. For all its bioengineering, it still had vulnerable spots. It recovered quickly, spinning to face me with a snarl of rage. One clawed hand swept toward my head. I ducked, feeling the wind of its passage, and grabbed its wrist with both hands. Using its own momentum, I pivoted and threw it over my shoulder in a move my judo instructor would have been proud of. Cather hit the ground hard, and the crowd gasped. This wasn't supposed to be happening, but I knew it was just the beginning. Cather was stronger, faster, and had 4 arms to my 2. In a straight fight, I'd lose in seconds. But humans don't fight fair. We fight to win. As Cather rolled to its feet, I was already moving. The arena floor was smooth crystal, polished to a mirror finish. I dropped to my knees and slid across it like I was stealing second base. My legs scissors kicking toward Cather's knees. The impact sent it tumbling again, but this time it caught itself with its lower arms. 2 upper arms lashed out, claws extended. I rolled desperately to the side, feeling razor-sharp points tear through the air where I'd been. "Impressive," Cather admitted, rising to its full height, but futile. It was right. I was already breathing hard, while it barely seemed winded. I needed to change the dynamic. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said, backing toward the arena wall. "You're not even the scariest thing I faced." Cather's eyes narrowed. What could be more frightening than death? "Calculus," I said, and threw myself backward. The arena wall was designed for spectacle, a transparent barrier that let the crowd see everything. What the designers hadn't considered was that crystal, while strong, could be shattered if you knew how to create resonance. I hit the wall with my full weight, and it cracked. Not enough to break through, but enough to create sharp fragments. As Cather lunged toward me, I grabbed a shard of crystal and spun to face it. The shard caught Cather in the shoulder, drawing a line of dark blood. It roared in pain and rage, and I realized I just escalated this from a quick execution to a real fight. Cather came at me with all four arms, no longer trying to end this quickly. It wanted to make me suffer now. I danced backward, using every martial arts class I'd ever taken, every self-defense seminar, every playground fight from my childhood. But I was losing. Each exchange left me slower, more battered. Cather's claws had opened cuts on my arms and legs. My perfect, auction-worthy body was becoming a map of pain. The crowd was on its feet now, watching with fascination as the impossible began to look merely improbable. A human was actually surviving against a champion. Cather feinted with its upper arms, then swept low with its lower ones. I jumped, but not high enough. Claws raked across my thigh, sending me tumbling to the ground. I rolled to avoid a follow-up strike, but Cather was already there, one massive hand closing around my throat. "You fought well," it said, lifting me off the ground. "But this ends now." My vision was starting to go dark. In the crowd, I could see faces pressed against the barrier aliens who had come to watch an execution, and then found themselves witnessing something else entirely. That's when I remembered my father's words. They can take our freedom, but they can't take our soul unless we let them. With the last of my strength, I reached up and grabbed Cather's wrist, not to fight it, to hold on. And then I did something that no other species in the galaxy would have considered. I smiled. "You know what the difference is between humans and every other species you've conquered?" I whispered through my crushed throat. "We're the only ones crazy enough to hug a grenade?" Cather's eyes widened as it realized what I meant. In my other hand, I held a crystal shard, not pointing outward, but inward, pressed against my own chest. If it killed me, I would drive it into my heart. We would die together. "This is madness," Cather said. "This is humanity," I replied. For the first time in its existence, Cather faced something it had never encountered, an opponent who preferred mutual destruction to defeat. It had been bred for war, trained for killing, engineered for victory, but it had never faced someone who was willing to lose everything to avoid losing what mattered most. Slowly, Cather lowered me to the ground. Its hand released my throat. "I yield," it said, its voice carrying across the stunned silence of the arena. The crowd erupted. Beings who had come to watch a novelty execution were on their feet, screaming in languages I didn't recognize. "Hey!" Auctioneer stood frozen, his tentacles quivering with shock. But I wasn't done yet. "I invoke the right of succession," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the noise. "As victor in single combat, I claim the right to speak for my species." This time, the silence that fell was absolute. The right of succession was even more theoretical than the right of challenge. It hadn't been invoked in 3,000 years. Auctioneer's translator worked frantically. The right of succession grants the victor the authority to negotiate on behalf of their species. But you are the last human. What could you possibly negotiate? I stood in the center of the arena, blood streaming from my wounds, my body pushed beyond its limits. But I stood tall. "I negotiate for the future," I said. "I claim the right to establish a human colony on an uninhabited world. I claim the right to breed free humans, to teach them what it means to be human. I claim the right to ensure that humanity doesn't die with me." The crowd was going wild. Some were cheering, others were arguing, and a few were already placing bets on whether the consortium would honor such an unprecedented claim. A new voice cut through the chaos, cold, mechanical, and absolute. "The Consortium Council recognizes the right of succession." The speaker was a praetor, one of the ancient AI constructs that actually governed the Consortium. Its holographic form materialized above the arena, crackling with barely contained energy. "The human Maya Chun has successfully invoked both the right of challenge and the right of succession. Her claims are valid under Consortium law. She will be granted a Class M world in the outer reaches. along with the genetic materials necessary to restore her species. The crowd went insane. In the space of an hour, I had gone from being the last human to being the mother of a new human civilization. But the Praetor wasn't finished. However, the consortium also recognizes that this precedent could be ... problematic. Therefore, the laws governing the rights of challenge and succession are hereby amended. No species may invoke them again. I felt a chill run down my spine. You're changing the rules because I won? We are adapting to prevent future complications, the Praetor replied. Your species' psychological profile has been updated. Humans are now classified as dangerous. If desperate, future encounters will account for this. As I was led away from the arena, I realized what I had really accomplished. I hadn't just won my freedom, I had forced the most powerful civilization in the galaxy to acknowledge that humans were too dangerous to be kept as slaves. They would rather give us our own world than risk another human doing what I had done. 6 months later, I stood on the observation deck of the colony ship New Hope, watching as a blue-green world grew larger in the view screen. New Earth. The consortium had designated it, though I planned to call it something else entirely. The ship's medical bay had been working overtime, using the genetic samples to create the first generation of free humans in over a year. Soon, there would be children running through corridors that had once held only despair. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's chief medical officer, and one of the few humans who had managed to avoid processing, joined me at the view screen. The first batch of embryos are developing perfectly, she reported. We'll have our first births in 7 months. I nodded, my hand unconsciously moving to my still flat stomach. The consortium had been true to their word. They'd provided everything we needed to rebuild our species, but they'd also made it clear that this was our only chance. One world, one shot at survival. Maya, Dr. Kim said quietly, do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? The consortium gave us this because they're afraid of us. What happens when our children grow up? What happens when they want to explore the galaxy? I smiled, remembering a conversation I'd had with Cather just before leaving the station. The champion had sought me out, wanting to understand what had driven me to risk everything. You could have accepted slavery, it had said. Your species would have survived as servants. Why choose the harder path? Because, I had replied, being human isn't about survival. It's about choosing who you want to be, especially when that choice is hard. Now, watching our new world grow larger, I gave Dr. Kim the same answer Cather had given me when I'd asked if it regretted yielding. The right thing isn't always the easy thing, I said, but it's always the human thing. As the ship entered orbit around New Earth, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Hope, not just for survival, but for the future. For children who would grow up free, who would learn that being human meant never kneeling, never surrendering, never accepting that someone else had the right to define your worth. The consortium had given us a world to contain us, thinking they were solving a problem. What they'd actually done was give humanity something we'd never had before, a chance to grow without limits, to become something even we couldn't imagine. And in the depths of space, monitoring stations throughout the galaxy updated their files. On humanity, the classification remained the same, dangerous if desperate, but they'd missed the most important part. Humans were always desperate, desperate to be free, desperate to protect what we loved, desperate to prove that we were worth more than the sum of our parts. The day I refused to kneel in that auction house, I thought I was fighting for my own freedom, but I had actually been fighting for something much more important, the right to define what it meant to be human. And that, I realized as our ship descended toward New Earth, was a fight we would never stop winning. 3 billion credits had been bid for my body that day, but my soul, that was never for sale. Not at any price. To be continued.